There is a kind of regret that makes no noise. It does not wake you up at night. It does not stop your life. It cannot be seen from the outside. It stays there, in some precise place inside you, silent and patient, like something waiting to be acknowledged. Sometimes it waits for years, sometimes it waits for decades, and when it finally appears, it does not come as a crisis. It comes as a simple question you do not know how to answer. This is the story of two people who lost each other at 17 because of a choice made out of fear, and found each other again at 46 with the courage they had not had back then. Do not leave now. What you are about to hear will make you think about something you may have kept on pause for too long. And if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, do it now, so you do not miss any of these stories. It was June of 1994 in Turin, in the Vanciglia district, and the air smelled of linden trees and hot asphalt, and that light, irresponsible freedom that only the last weeks of school can have. Elena Russo, 17 years old, shoulder-length dark hair, hazel eyes, a laugh that could be heard from 3 classrooms away, was sitting on the steps of Liceo Classico Massimo d'Azeglio with a book in her lap that she was not reading. She was watching Marco Bellini. Elena Russo, 17 years old, shoulder-length dark hair, hazel eyes, a laugh that could be heard from 3 classrooms away, was sitting on the steps of Liceo Classico Massimo d'Azeglio with a book in her lap that she was not reading. She was watching Marco Bellini. Marco Bellini, 17 years old, white t-shirt, faded Levi's 501 jeans, a worn green Invicta backpack slung over one shoulder, had something Elena did not yet know how to name, but recognized every time he walked into a room. They had met in September, fallen in love without realizing it between October and November, and by January they had become inseparable in that awkward and total way you are inseparable at 17, when you do not yet have enough experience to pretend nothing is happening. They walked along the Po River in the afternoons, bought 1 Coca-Cola and 2 straws, talked for hours about things that seemed enormous and probably were not, wrote letters by hand because cell phones were something almost nobody had. It was the kind of love that takes up all the available space without asking your permission, the kind that makes you wake up in the morning already thinking about the person, that makes everything seem sharper and more confusing at the same time. They had never said "I love you," not yet, but they had said it in other ways 1,000 times, in the imprecise and involuntary ways 17-year-olds say it when they have not yet learned to hide what they feel. It was the kind of love that does not yet know it is love, because it has not had time to become habit, and maybe that is why it stays for so long. Then July came, and with July came the choice that would change everything. Marco's father had found a job in Milan, and the family would move in August. Marco was 17. He had no say in the matter, no money, nothing concrete to oppose that decision with, except the fact that Elena was in Turin. Elena had suggested writing to each other, calling each other, waiting. She had said that 2 years would pass, that at 19 they would be free to choose where to live. Marco had said yes, and then he had made a different choice. Not out of cruelty, not because he did not care, out of fear. The fear of someone who is 17 and does not yet know that certain pains have to be crossed, not avoided. He had thought that cutting things off would be cleaner, that disappearing would be kinder, that letting go was the right thing to do. He was wrong. He understood it already in October, looking at the phone that no longer rang and knowing he was the one who had chosen silence. He understood it in November, when someone asked him about Elena and he said they had broken up as if it had been a mutual decision. It had not been. It had been his fear deciding for both of them, as fear often does when you do not recognize it for what it is. He had stopped writing after the 3rd letter. He had stopped answering phone calls after August. He had let silence say what he did not have the courage to say with words, and Elena had understood, even though no one had explained it to her, even though for months she had kept waiting for the phone to ring. This is what no one teaches you about love at 17. It is not less real because you are young. It hurts exactly as much as it hurts later. Maybe more, because you do not yet have the tools to handle it. You have not yet learned that things pass. You do not yet have the certainty that you will survive. It took Elena almost 2 years to stop thinking about it every day. Then she kept thinking about it now and then, for a very long time, the way you think about certain things that never fully close. Then she did what people do. She lived. She graduated in law from the University of Turin, trained at a law firm on Via Roma, and built a career as an attorney specializing in family law. At 38, she bought an apartment on Via Mazzini, 72 square meters with a window overlooking the rooftops, and furnished it carefully, choosing every single thing as if she were building something permanent. She had had 2 important relationships. One lasted 4 years and ended with mutual respect and no drama. The other lasted 7 years and ended with more pain but also with more awareness. In both relationships she had been present, loyal, attentive. In both she had given a lot. And yet in both there had always been something, a millimeter of distance, a small reserve she could never quite fill and could not even properly explain to herself. She had never married, had no children, and had long since stopped asking herself whether that was a regret or a choice. She had decided it was both, and that it was all right that way. At 46, she was a precise, competent woman with a schedule that was always full and a way of moving through the world that did not leave much room for the unexpected. She had built a life that worked. That was not the same as a life that made her happy in every corner of it, but it worked, and she had learned that this was not surrender. It was an adult choice, and it required its own kind of courage. Every now and then, late at night, with her laptop still open on the desk and the muffled sound of the city outside the window, she thought maybe she had left something unfinished somewhere. She did not know exactly what, only that it was there. Marco Bellini, meanwhile, had lived a parallel and completely separate life. He had moved to Milan with his family in August of 1994, studied economics at Bocconi while working part-time in a bar in Porta Ticinese, found a job at a business consulting firm, and built a solid career that did not entirely excite him, but that he respected. At 34, he had married Alessandra. They had had a daughter, Giulia, who was now 11 and looked enough like him to make him smile every time he looked at her. The marriage had ended 5 years earlier, without betrayal and without shouting, with that silent exhaustion that is sometimes harder to explain than a noisy breakup. He had done his part in that marriage, or at least he had tried, but there is a difference between doing your part and being truly present, and Marco knew in some honest corner of himself that the two had not always been the same. He lived alone in a 65 square meter apartment on Corso Lodi in Milan, with a bookcase full of books he almost always read and a kitchen where he almost never cooked. He did not think about Elena Russo every day. He thought about her sometimes, in the imprecise ways you think about things that were never resolved, like a file open on your computer that you never remember to close. Exactly 30 years had passed when the message arrived. It was a Tuesday evening in September. Marco was eating reheated pizza in front of the television with the volume low when his phone vibrated on the table with a LinkedIn notification. Elena Russo has sent you a connection request. He stayed still for almost a minute, with the fork halfway between the plate and his mouth. Then he put the fork down, picked up the phone, and opened the profile. The picture was small but recognizable. The same structure of her face, shorter hair now. A smile that looked the same and completely different at once. Attorney, Turin, specialized in family law. He stared at that page for a length of time he could not really measure. Outside the apartment, the traffic on Corso Lodi flowed normally. The pizza was getting cold on the plate. He accepted the request, then stayed still, staring at the screen, not knowing what to do next. as if accepting that request had opened something he did not yet know if he was ready to open. 30 years had passed. 30 years were an entire life, irreversible choices, people who had become other people. What do you say to someone you loved at 17 and have not seen since you were 18? The next day, Elena wrote a message. It simply said, "Hi Marco, I was hoping to find you. How are you?" A few simple words that contained 30 years of silence. It took Marco 4 hours to answer, not because he did not know what to say, but because he knew too many things to say and could not choose which one to put first. In the end, he wrote, "Hi Elena, I'm doing well. It's strange seeing you here. Beautiful, but strange." This is what no one understands about interrupted stories. They do not really end. They go on pause, they get filed away. They are covered by the years and by all the other things that happen. But they stay there, in some precise place inside you, waiting for someone to reopen the file. They wrote to each other for 3 weeks every evening, longer and longer each time. First short, cautious messages, then conversations that lasted until midnight, then phone calls that began as 5 minutes and ended 2 hours later. There was something strange and, at the same time, completely natural about those conversations, as if 30 years of silence had created a pressure that was now looking for a way out. And the words came with an ease neither of them had expected. They talked about everything that had happened in between, the choices they had made, the ones they could have made differently, what they had become, and what they had not become. They also talked about small things, what they were eating for dinner, the books they were reading, difficult colleagues, habits they had developed over the years. They were the details of everyday lives, and sharing them carried a specific weight of its own. At one point, Elena said something Marco did not expect. She said, "I always understood why you did it. It took me years, but I understood. You were scared, and you chose the road that looked shorter. The problem is that short roads are often the longest ones." Marco was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "You're right, and I'm sorry. I never told you that, and I should have told you 30 years ago." They were two 46-year-old adults having the conversation they should have had at 17. They met for the first time in October, in Turin, in a bar on Via Po that had already existed in the 90s and that Elena remembered well. She had chosen that place on purpose, not out of nostalgia, but because she wanted their first meeting to happen somewhere familiar, somewhere she felt at home. Marco arrived 5 minutes early and stood outside the door for 3 minutes before going in. When Elena saw him, she thought he resembled Marco Bellini, the way a song you hear after 30 years resembles the way you remembered it. The same in the essential places, different in everything else. They sat down, ordered 2 coffees, and for the first 10 minutes they talked about practical things. The trip, the traffic, the rain that had begun to fall outside the window. It was the kind of conversation 2 people have when they have 1,000 things to say and are still trying to understand where to begin. Each was evaluating the other, not with suspicion, but with that particular attention reserved for important things. Marco noticed that Elena still held the cup with both hands when she drank coffee. Elena noticed that Marco still had the habit of looking at his hands when he was searching for the right words. Then Elena said, "Why now, after 30 years?" Marco looked at her and said, "Because my daughter asked me a question last week. She asked me if I regretted anything, and I told her no, and she looked at me with that face children make when they know you're lying." Elena stayed silent for a moment. Then she said, "And what did you regret?" Marco said, "The choice I made at 17. Not the move, not the distance. The choice to disappear instead of facing it. It was the shortest road, like you said, and it led nowhere." Outside the window, the rain fell on the cobblestones of Via Po, and the streetlights reflected in the water on the pavement. Inside the bar, it was warm, smelling of coffee and old wood, with the low sound of other conversations around them. What happened next was not the ending of a novel. It was not a cinematic embrace, it was not a declaration, it was not a simple answer to 30 years of silence. It was something more difficult and more real. It was two people consciously deciding not to rush, to get to know each other again as the adults they had become, not as the teenagers they had once been. They saw each other again the following week, then the week after that. Marco began coming to Turin one weekend a month, then every 2 weeks. They did not call each other boyfriend and girlfriend, at least not right away. They called each other by their names, wrote to each other every day, told each other the small things of daily life, with the care reserved for things that truly matter. There is a huge difference between falling in love at 17 and choosing someone at 46. At 17, you do not really know who you are yet, so you cannot truly choose. You can only follow what you feel. At 46, you know exactly who you are, you know your flaws, your fears, the things that will no longer change, and you choose anyway. Maybe that is why it weighs more, and maybe that is why it is worth more. 6 months after that evening on Via Po, Marco was looking at real estate listings in Turin. He did not tell Elena right away. First, he wanted to be sure it was not nostalgia, not the need to repair something that cannot be repaired, not the romantic version of running away from something else. Then one day he told her. She stayed silent for a moment, then said, "You don't have to do this for me." And he said, "I know, that's why I'm doing it. This story does not end with an answer. It ends with a choice." And the most important thing about that choice was not what it opened, it was what it required. The courage to recognize that 30 years earlier you had made a mistake, the ability to say it out loud, and the willingness to do something different now, not because the past can be changed, but because the present still belongs to you. The choices we make out of fear always seem the most reasonable at the moment we make them. They seem cautious, they seem mature, they seem like the right thing to do. Only later, sometimes much later, do we understand what they cost us. Marco had made a choice at 17. It had not been a bad choice. It had been a frightened choice. And there is a difference, even if the result sometimes looks the same. The difference is this: bad choices are defended. Frightened choices are recognized, named, and sometimes repaired. Not always, not in every case, but sometimes, yes. And the question this story leaves open is simple. Is there something you have left on pause? Something you archived because it seemed easier that way? Something you never gave the answer it deserved? The right answer does not always arrive 30 years later. It may not arrive at all. But it only arrives if you decide to look for it, only if you stop treating important things like paperwork to be filed away and recognize them for what they are. Open choices still waiting for an answer. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. And if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Every week, I come back with stories like this.